Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight we're stepping into a world where winter wasn't just cold, it was a predator. Picture this. You're standing in the doorway of a rough-hewn cabin somewhere in the Dakota Territory, maybe 1870, and the wind is screaming across the prairie like it's trying to peel the skin right off the earth. Your breath clouds in front of you even though you're technically indoors. The woodpile that looked so generous in October is now a sad little stack that might last another week if you're careful, 2 if you're desperate. And winter? Winter has 3 more months to go. Good thing this isn't your life, because what you're about to learn is that survival out here required a kind of brutal creativity most of us can't even imagine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment below letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing this community spread across time zones, all of us gathering in the dark to remember what people endured. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before dawn because that's what cold does. It never lets you sleep deeply enough to forget it's there. The darkness inside your cabin is absolute, the kind of black that presses against your eyeballs. And for a moment, you lie perfectly still, beneath a pile of quilts, buffalo robes, and your own wool coat, listening. The wind has died down. That's either mercy or warning. You can't tell which yet. Your breath rises in small clouds, even here, cocooned under every textile you own, and you can feel the frost that's formed on the underside of the roof boards during the night. By spring, you'll have a collection of frost nails, icicles that hang from each nail head punched through the ceiling, growing longer every night, like slow-motion stalactites in a cave you can't escape. The fire in your small iron stove died sometime around midnight. You know this because you remember waking to feed it one last time, pushing in 2 split logs you really couldn't afford to burn, watching the coals flare briefly before settling back into their patient consumption. That was hours ago. Now the stove ticks softly as the metal contracts in the cold, a sound like a clock counting down to something you'd rather not think about. You calculate. 6 logs left in the corner, maybe 7 if that half-rotted piece near the bottom is still dry enough to burn. The nearest timber is 4 miles south, across open prairie that's currently buried under 3 feet of snow, with a crust thick enough to walk on, until it isn't. And then you're up to your hip in a drift that feels like the earth itself is trying to swallow you. The cabin has 1 window. Not glass, you can't afford glass, but greased paper stretched tight over a wooden frame. It lets in a dim, yellowish light and keeps out most of the wind. When the real cold comes, you'll close the wooden shutters over it entirely, and the cabin will go dark, lit only by firelight and the occasional tallow candle. It will smell like smoke and bodies and drying herbs and the chamber pot that can't be emptied when snow is waist-deep outside. It will be cramped and close, and some days you'll ache for fresh air, for space, for silence. But it will be warm, mostly. The corners will stay cold, and frost will form on the inside of the walls on the worst nights. But the center space near the fire will be bearable. You'll survive. You finish the east wall and move to the south side. This wall is better, fewer gaps, tighter notching. You work methodically, gap by gap, smoothing each section with care. The clay will dry hard over the next few days, and if you're fortunate, it will hold until spring. Some will crack during freeze-thaw cycles, especially in February, and you'll repair it then. But that's a problem for future you. Right now, You're focused on December. Inside, something smells good. Your wife has started the evening stew. Dried beans soaking since morning. A bit of salt pork from the barrel in the cellar. Dried herbs. A few carrots from the garden that are starting to wrinkle. It's thin compared to summer meals, but it's hot and filling. Tomorrow, maybe cornbread, if the meal holds out. The corn was ground at the settlement mill, 10 miles east, and you've got 2 sacks stored. Cornbread and salt pork. Salt pork and cornbread. That rhythm will carry you through until March, along with potatoes from the root cellar, if they don't rot. You stored them carefully, brushed the dirt off but didn't wash them, layered them in crates with straw between each layer, kept them in the coldest, darkest corner of the cellar. Done right, they'll last 5 months, maybe 8. Here's what they didn't tell you before you came west, before you filed your homestead claim and imagined yourself as some kind of pioneer hero. Fire is everything, and fire is never enough. You can burn every stick of furniture you own, every fence post, every wooden tool handle, and winter will still find ways into your bones. The families who survived out here, and not all of them did, learned something that sounds almost like heresy to modern ears. They learned that fire was just one tool in a much larger strategy, and sometimes it wasn't even the most important one. Let me take you through a day, a real day, the kind documented in dozens of frontier diaries and memoirs, the kind that happened over and over across the Great Plains and the mountain territories throughout the 19th century. You're in that cabin, and you've just made your calculation about the wood. You have maybe 2 weeks of fuel if you burn it sparingly. But sparingly has a cruel definition out here. It means fire only twice a day. Once in the morning to melt snow for water and cook a quick breakfast. Once in the evening for supper. The stove stays cold the rest of the time. The daytime high today, if you had a thermometer, would register around 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside your cabin, with no fire, it'll be maybe 20 degrees. That's your reality from now until March. You force yourself out from under the quilts, moving fast because hesitation is dangerous. The air is so cold, it makes your teeth ache when you breathe through your mouth. Your fingers are already stiff, clumsy, as you fumble for the clothes you laid out last night. Or rather, the extra layers you'll add to the clothes you slept in. Nobody undresses for bed in winter. The woman who lived 3 miles east of here, Martha Peterson, wrote in her diary about wearing the same wool dress for 4 months straight, November through February, adding and subtracting layers beneath it, but never actually taking it off. She wrote that undressing felt like inviting death in for tea. Historians still argue whether this level of continuous clothing was universal or just common among the poorest homesteaders, but the archaeological evidence is pretty clear. Frontier families wore their clothes to threads, and winter wear showed the most damage because it was genuinely lived in. Your first task is fire, obviously, but even this requires strategy. You've learned not to use your good kindling, the dry grass and bark strips you spent autumn gathering, unless absolutely necessary. Instead, you reach for the buffalo chips stacked in the corner. Yes, dried buffalo dung. It burns slower than wood, produces less heat, but you've got a whole basket of it, gathered from the prairie, back when you could still walk out there without snowshoes. The smell when it burns is earthy, grassy, not nearly as bad as you feared. Plenty of frontier families burned cow chips, horse dung, twisted hay, even sunflower stalks. A woman named Lydia Murphy, homesteading in Nebraska in 1873, calculated that she burned approximately 2 tons of prairie coal, her euphemism for buffalo chips, each winter, supplementing the half-cord of actual wood her husband could manage to haul from the distant river valley. You coax the coals back to life, feeding them chips and then one precious piece of split wood, watching the flames climb with an almost religious intensity. The heat, when it finally starts to radiate from the stove, feels like forgiveness. You hold your hands close, feeling the blood start to move again in your fingertips. That painful prickling that means you haven't done permanent damage. Not today, anyway. Your neighbor, 2 homesteads over, lost 3 toes last January. Frostbite that turned black, then green. He did the amputation himself, with a heated knife and a leather strap clenched between his teeth, because the nearest doctor was 60 miles away, in a town he couldn't reach through the snow. You think about that sometimes, about how thin the margin is between survival and catastrophe. While the cabin warms, and warms is generous, we're talking maybe up to 40 degrees near the stove. You melt snow for water. The bucket you left by the door has frozen solid overnight. A solid block of ice that'll take an hour to melt, even on direct heat. So you go outside into the blue dark dawn, and this is where you learn what cold really means. The air doesn't just chill you, it attacks. It finds every gap in your layered clothing, every loose button, every space between scarf and collar. Your eyes water instantly, and the tears try to freeze on your lashes. Your nose hairs stiffen. The snow crunches under your boots with that particular squeak that only happens below 0. A sound like styrofoam being crushed, and you know without checking that it's well below the 15 degrees you estimated. You scoop clean snow into your bucket. Not the stuff near the ground, that's got too much dirt and prairie dust, but the fresh layer from 2 nights ago, and you hurry back inside. The difference between outside and inside feels enormous, even though it's maybe a 20-degree gap. This is what frontier families lived with, a constant negotiation between degrees of cold, none of them actually warm by any reasonable standard. The question was never, how do we get warm, but rather, how do we keep the cold from killing us? There's a difference, and it's not just semantic. It's the difference between comfort and survival, between thriving and just barely hanging on until spring. The snow is still falling outside that frontier cabin, but slower now, softer, each flake drifting down like a whispered secret between earth and sky. You've made it through another day, and that's what survival looked like out there. Not dramatic victories or heroic moments, but simply the quiet persistence of waking up again, of coaxing fire from reluctant fuel, of layering wool and hide and hope between yourself and the infinite cold. Those frontier families weren't superhuman. They were just human in the most essential way, doing what humans have always done when faced with impossible circumstances, adapting, enduring, finding warmth not just in fire, but in the small rituals of survival itself. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep in your own warm bed, with your thermostat-controlled air and your insulated walls, maybe you'll think about them, all those families scattered across the frozen prairie, huddled under buffalo robes, counting their remaining logs, waiting for spring. They made it through. Most of them. Not all, but most. And their ingenuity, their stubborn refusal to surrender to winter's teeth, that's worth remembering. Rest easy now. The cold can't reach you here. Let the darkness settle soft around you. Let your breathing slow and deepen. And know that you're safe. You're warm. And morning will come gentle and kind. Until next time, friends, sleep well.